It's another Friday, Tim. Here we are. Here we go.
Good day. How are you, Merv?
I'm doing well. I'm absolutely enjoying life. And what do they say? Taking names and I don't know. Anyway, I'm enjoying life and it's good.
Good, good. So this week is going to be the last part of our discussion on leadership for a while. What would you like to talk about? I know that we've covered almost all the aspects of leadership that PMI would be interested in if we were to have a project management conversation.
Yeah, I think that, and in deference to our listeners, especially the younger project managers in training or first or second year project managers, we've talked a lot about mentoring. We've talked a lot about EQ and emotional intelligence. I'm wondering if maybe we could wrap up our leadership series by maybe taking mentoring, for example, to start with, to a different area, and that is in terms of mentoring, say, our client base. So whether I'm an internal IT provider or an external contractor that provides IT services, I still have clients. I still have my end users. And maybe we can talk a little bit about mentoring our end users and our client stakeholders.
That would be brilliant. And we forget that we train and we support people above us as well as we support people around us. We even train ourselves and we talk about that. But yeah, let's focus on mentoring from a client-based standpoint, from a stakeholder standpoint. So let's start off here. What is your favorite experience about mentoring a client or mentoring an executive that you can remember?
I've got several, but one that comes to mind because and for those who have not been following your podcast up until now, I left corporate IT in 2003, 2004 in that era. And since then, I've been advising mostly on the client side in terms of how the client can prepare themselves to work with an IT provider and in terms of developing their systems. So I've had a lot of experience in actually mentoring the client base. But what's interesting is it really gets challenging when you have to mentor someone who is at the top of the client organization. And I think that's been some of my favorite experiences. And I remember probably one of my more recent ones, and that is I had a very, very strong executive in terms of the business, but with very little IT knowledge. And their systems were very antiquated. So even from that perspective, they would have no knowledge of what it takes to develop a brand new system. And so one of the things that I enjoyed thoroughly in that situation was kind of walking that fine line between understanding she's the boss, but understanding how it is that I can also help her understand enough about developing and delivering a system so that she could play her role effectively. And so that was probably one of my favorite experiences. How about
Yeah,
yourself?
that's it. It's very similar. Working with sponsors, I would work, again, I had about 20, 25 data center projects, and I had many, many projects where directors and vice presidents and executives were in charge of maybe 25,000 or 75,000 workstations. And it was like, yeah, you have a lot of investment here. You're getting value out of it. And having those, pivoting from a tool or a solution discussion to a value discussion was amazing. And oftentimes the tables were turned. I had a lot of clients that would say, okay, we're talking about return on investment here. I remember one explicitly. And he said to me, Tim, you're leaving a lot of money on the table here. You're ignoring a lot of the profitability of this solution. You're looking at the time that's saved in remote fixing and upgrades and patches. but what about all the power savings that you're providing us over the next 5 years? Let's sit down and do some work over an Excel spreadsheet and see what we come up with. And that was mind blowing. It turned out from me to start talking to them, and all of a sudden I became the student.
But see what we've already done here? We've already taken the project manager, which you and I played those roles, out of the day-to-day Gantt chart, status report, that process oriented, now to be much more customer focused and basically providing strong advice to people who are relying upon that advice. And this is the whole idea that I think we've been trying to get across in these podcasts, is it's not just the day-to-day delivery. It's all of this other human factor that goes around what it is that we do that's required of us.
Yeah, and I hear an echo of one of my early consulting teachers in the back of my head saying, "Tim, yeah, you're looking at nickels and dimes saving people money on computers. If you get somebody and you solve a personal or a professional problem, that's where the big money is. It's not actually fixing a technology problem. It's solving people problems, the way organizations function, the way organizations take advantage of technology, where there's lots and lots of opportunity to be had. I don't talk about this stuff just because it's a nice to have. I talk about it because this is a niche that so few people play in.
Well, and what you just said is so important. It's the user is using technology to solve a problem. We project managers tend to get into saying, well, the delivery of the system is the problem. No, that's the solution to the client's problem. And so we have to put our mindset differently when dealing with our teams to deliver versus dealing with the client team to accept.
So here we are. Here we are talking about training stakeholders, and all of a sudden we're 180 degrees around saying we have to remind ourselves and train ourselves to adopt a different mindset. I'm constantly surprised at this leadership and management material where you look at you're changing your attitude more than asking people to change theirs.
Right. And that's where the PMBOK, and I haven't been as heavily or as deeply into PMBOK 7, which I think is much more human focused or people focused. But even the old PMBOK 6, it trained us well to deliver. But there was less kind of emphasis. There was emphasis, but less emphasis on what we are talking about. And that's the human factors in dealing with our clients and actually our team people on a different level with a different mindset. So yeah, this is exciting stuff.
Yeah. So here we have opportunities to train people who are above us in rank and authority and people who are peers in rank and authority. We can't just barge in and say, here, let me teach you something. How do you find those little windows of opportunity? I call them teachable moments. How do you find those teachable moments in your day-to-day work?
Well, and that's kind of what I referred to when I spoke of my experience with this one executive. It is a fine line. We're walking a fine line, and this deals with maturity. Maybe, and I think I talked about the fact that we want to get into emotional intelligence as well. This really tasks our emotional intelligence because quite often we as project managers, even within our own organization, are not at the same rank as our stakeholder that we're dealing with. And so we're looking for that teachable moment to allow our stakeholder to be more effective at their role in the project, while also playing deference to the fact that they have a very responsible role that is probably more responsible even than ours. So yeah, there is that fine line. And the teachable moment to me is I start to develop a trust level early on, always respectfully understanding their role in their position, but begin with that human relation trust level. That's where I start. And then I look for the teachable moments.
Yeah, it's winning individual hearts and minds as you go along, and it's very proactive. And you're right. It starts off with understanding ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and this is the wonderful thing. If we understand the mechanisms that go on inside of our own head and heart, we can actually start looking and say, hey, those people across the table or those people in the cafeteria sitting with me over a cup of coffee, they have the same mechanisms going on in our heads. And it goes a long way to helping us understand what their influences, motivations are.
Well, exactly. And I can think even of a situation where the executive that I reported to as an advisor on the project was a little bit perturbed with the, um, shall we say, the machinations one of her staff was creating on the project. And she was frustrated enough that she was bound and determined to remove this person from the project. I felt that despite all of the created nonsense that this person was was providing on the project, she was extremely valuable to the point where to the place that we were in that particular project. And so I went to the executive and I pleaded the case for this recalcitrant employee of hers. Now, that's a long story to say, had I not developed that trust relationship up until that point, I would have had no business going to her, to the executive, and saying, can we save this employee for this time, for this time in the project? I would have had no business doing that without that trust.
Yes, yes. You have to have some foundation where you can have a fair exchange of information. And then you can start working on the influence and the motivations and the rhetoric. It's tough. It's tough. And like you said, it starts off with emotional intelligence.
Yeah. But some of that too, think about this. I'm going to use a Timism. Some of that can be done over a cup of coffee. You bump into them in the cafeteria or around the coffee pot, and you strike up the conversation and lead them to understanding your approach to the project and how you can help them in their role.
And it starts off with assessment. You never try to guess. You always gather information. And I've found leading the answer through questions as a brilliant approach. Not through manipulation, although these tools work in manipulation as well, but using it in influence and motivation to find out where they are in their heads, in their mindset, and where they want to be. And maybe it's just, I need to make an adjustment on the project to match what their needs are. When I'm working with executives, far be it from me to tell them how to run the company. I'm just here helping them solve one piece of a very, very big puzzle for them.
Well, in the example that I've been working with you on this point, this particular executive now had within her hands this project that was well north of $100 million. And because she was not IT savvy, and she was very conservative, did not want to make a mistake because she was dealing with those kinds of funds. It was clear that she wanted help. She was not afraid to ask for help. But in my role as project advisor, I had to be available so that she could understand what it was that I could help her with. And so you're always having to be, and I think I've used this in past podcasts, you're always having to have your observing sights on. You have to always be observing, calculating, as you said just now, assessing, just try to really understand. And when I understood her motive of being conservative and not wanting to make any kind of large mistakes, it was a lot more, it was a lot simpler for me to understand where it was that I could approach and help her.
Yes, yes, yes. And it all starts with emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Let's review the definition, because it always references understanding others. But if you look at the definition, it has nothing to do with other people. It has everything to do with us. It's, let's see here, the capacity to be aware of, control, and express your emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetic. Handle your relationships. It's an understanding of you in order for you to build the tools and the framework in order to understand others.
Yeah. So you've seen this example that we've been working with executives. It's so easy if you're not really thinking in an emotionally intelligent way. You come at it as a project manager, just walk in and say to the executive, well, that's easy. This is what you've got to do. That doesn't work. That's just kind of like, use phrasing, just understand, okay, me as a project manager, I cannot barge in that fashion. I have to be able to limit my approach to this, my ability to handle that interpersonal relationship. And maybe I use a word like, or a phrasing like, if it's okay with you, let me take a crack at it and then go walk you through it and see if we're in the right direction. That way you put the onus back on them, but you are actually leading and doing the work for them. So it's just a different approach, knowing yourself and changing your mindset to be able to approach them in that way.
One of the best investments in learning I ever did was study as much of business decision making as I could. I was really curious watching these CEOs in 2000 and 2001. And, here were guys making 7 and 8 figures, and they were making $100 million decisions just like this, this, and this. And I was wondering, where did that come from? And it was amazing. These people are, just like us, except that they've been in a position where they've had to learn these, for 30 years. How do I make this decision? How do I prioritize this decision? And what decision is inconsequential for today? And you're right. Understanding yourself gives you, that ability to actually step into their world just for this moment.
And that's where this is the part that's so frustrating to me. When I go back over my early training as a project manager, and it was very much task oriented and very little emphasis on what you just mentioned. And the whole idea of emotional intelligence really didn't play. It was task, 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 deadline, 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 get it done at all costs. And that's just a mindset. I think it's still carrying over even today. I've seen it on projects today, but it's one of those things that I think hurts us as an industry and hurts us as individuals.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We're entering the information age. We have been entering it for the last 30 years. It's a slow progress. You're going to have early adopters. You're going to have laggards. You're going to have people who try to use old ideas for new ways of doing things, and they're going to fall by the way. And we're seeing this in the upset of our economy and our society. Now, the thing is, if we're astute enough, we can look inside not just people, but groups of people like organizations or corporate structures and look and see how we would behave with the knowledge and information they have. And all of a sudden, if we have this extra knowledge, like this person is making this decision in this manner, and that's appropriate for the decision, or this person is ignoring this little diamond of information. And if I present it as such, there's an opportunity for them to move forward very quickly. This is the value of, understanding my internal landscape and mechanism, and also understanding, the relationships and how people work together.
Well, and as a project manager, it's almost it's certainly twofold. One is understanding myself, but secondly, putting myself in that stakeholder's chair, as you were just saying. So now I have to now manage with two minds, basically.
This is the world that our project managers that we're training now are going to go into. Everything's upset. There was a time when you pulled a switch at a job and you did that for 20 years and you got a gold watch. That's gone. And so we have to be able to understand what's going on with the people and prepare the people for. And I'm almost certain that this is one of the things that fed into the decision for PMI back in 2015 to say 40% of the PMP exam is going to be on leadership and 10% is going to be on business. And yeah, half of it is on the tools, but the tools are not the result. The tools are functions that give us the result.
Yeah. And I kept thinking whenever we started this, and you and I came to it from two different aspects, but with the same idea in mind, and that is to apply the human factors to the people aspects. And I was thinking, if I put it into a modern day vernacular of building a home, it's the difference between the foreman understanding how to read plans and nail 2x4s together versus the foreman who talks to the homeowner that they're building the home for and working with that person to give them a delightful end result. So yes, it's important to understand plans and how to nail 2x4s together. That's half of what you do. But the other half is this leadership, this client service, this human factor approach to what it is that we're doing.
And I want to finish with one last comment. W.E. Deming and Peter Drucker argued this, okay? Peter Drucker argued with General Motors for decades, and they said, "That's nice, Peter. You have some great ideas. We'll move on." And W.E. Deming said the same thing with Ford. And it was only after MacArthur asked Deming to go to Japan was Deming able to exercise his theories on quality, on getting things right, on making me sure we have that voice of the customer. And this was the process of the beginning of the transition from selling on volume to selling on quality. And here we are heading towards the middle of the 21st century, and we're still learning this lesson. Isn't that fascinating?
And I was wondering, were they selling on volume versus selling on quality, or were they selling on quarterly earnings versus a 5-year approach to developing earnings? So
thank you, shareholder supremacy.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we leave this particular aspect, a thought occurred to me, and that is, as we as project managers develop this emotional intelligence towards our client base, and as we work with executive level stakeholders, where's the line between mentoring that stakeholder, who's probably several levels above us in the organization, versus providing excellent client service? Is there a difference between mentoring and client service?
Yeah, it's tough because an advisor is just that. Here I am. Here's the advice.
Yeah.
Here's what you're going to get if you follow my advice, but you have to make your decision. A service is basically a set of actions that leads them to another level, through a change or a transition or to a new opportunity. And so it's still their business. And this is something that I think about when I talk about quality and talk about leadership with my students. It's, it's not our deliverable. It's their deliverable and it's their business. So our job is advice, and I'll give you my advice, and that's what my job is. But I'm not going to ask you what to do. It's my job to know what's to do.
And it could be that as I offer my advice, I offer my service in such a way that it's of such excellence that my stakeholder wants more of me or more of my advice, which leads to mentoring opportunities. It could be as simple as that. So I'm just Anyway, I just thought I would throw us a left curve because it happened to hit me when you were talking about this.
Oh, no. There's a lot of other things we need to actually expose if we're going to talk about this. And I'll go through the transcript afterwards, because one of the things we have to look at is going back to our indicators and our metrics. Because as an advisor, we have to have a risk that says they're not going to take our advice.
Yeah.
And we have to enter risk in the conversation, as well as be able to ensure that we are on top of our game and that we are in control of what we can control. And what we cannot control are the decisions that our clients are going to make.
Yeah. You used the word indicators, and that brought to mind something that I was privy to years ago, and that was personality indicators or working together indicators, kind of things like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders or DISC profiles or whatever. Where do you stand on these kinds of personality assessment or personality indicator tools?
So, first of all, they're a snapshot where human beings are on a spectrum. For example, Myers-Briggs, introvert, extrovert, focused. They're both focused. One focused inside where the processing occurs there, and one focuses outside. We're all on a spectrum. And there's probably 15 to 25 influencers that will drive those things. I was just reading on this about 3 or 4 nights ago. And that is the basic criticism behind Myers-Briggs. And it's again, Myers-Briggs says there's 16 types, and you are going to be this type, not the other types. And it's not that Myers-Briggs says this. They don't. That's the problem. Yeah. These other indicators don't say that either. But we create these units of measure in order to compare and in order to make good decisions and in order to prioritize. So it's basically a way to memorize certain things so that you don't have to think about things when you're in the heat of the moment later.
Well, in my case, when I did and I still remember this, it's ENTJ. And the person who helped us with understanding our profiles said that largely we don't, in terms of the Myers-Briggs personality assessment, that we don't change that much over our lifetime. But here's the issue. So on the one hand, I found it useful. I understood how the ENTJ might interact with the INTJ, but where I found it confusing and frustrating was, how do you remember how to interact with everyone? And secondly, how do you remember everyone's tagline? Because they don't put it on the forehead. It's not there like I'm suddenly working with an INTJ or an INFJ or, whatever the other profiles were. And that was the frustrating part to me, is that if I had to stop and think, okay, Tim's and okay. And now I remember what he is, but how do I work with that person? Let me go to page 17. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, that's the part that frustrated me is how do I practically apply it?
So this is what Epictetus was talking about. He said a trained mind is better than any script. Okay. And that's what these character types are good for. They're creating good scripts that we can follow. Let me pull out a handy dandy tool I can use to measure, right?
Yeah.
Problem is, that's not the way life is. Life is analog. It's not digital. It doesn't have a lot of jaggy edges. It has a lot of smooth edges. So we can make some rough assumptions, and we can use our understanding of uncertainty to sort of take off some of the big jaggy items, but not all of them. So again, I think it's a great self-exploration tool. I'm a really big proponent of the Strengths Finder as a tool that you use in your journaling and your self-study. But from, putting it on your cubicle, I went through training with Myers-Briggs, and quite a few people, over half of them, put their indicator on the cube to basically say, yeah, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Thank you. I know what's important to you, and I know how to communicate with you effectively now. And then within 6 months, they were all taken down.
Yeah. By the way, the other thing I remember about the Myers-Briggs, and I found it fascinating. I really did. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that none of these things make sense. But where it helped me also understand, because it was fairly, for me, it was fairly accurate in terms of how I understood myself. But when I said I was ENTJ, the E being extrovert, I was 1 point over the line.
Yeah.
2 points back, I would have been an introvert, an INTJ. And so people would have looked at me totally differently. So yeah, there may be 16, but there's probably 256 or 1028 or whatever it happens to be because of the modulations within that.
And as we get older, I don't want to belabor this, but as we get older, we build skills to strengthen these strengths. Like, I'm an introvert. I have been all my entire life. My internal landscape is more fascinating to me than the external landscape. I can't help it. That's the way I grew, and that's the way I'm happy to be. However, I was pressed into certain situations where I had to get up on stage and set aside that introversion and express feelings and emotions when I was singing, such that people would actually, be able to understand what I was saying in my music. And then when I got into work and a professional job and business and eventually into management, it was like, okay, I have to be the person that steps up. So I had to learn gradually this E part of my character. It wasn't a weakness per se. It's just something that was never developed that I had to work on. And like you, I may have started off really strongly but as I get older, I find myself really well balanced.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is where I find these things useful is to understand me so that I can kick in my emotional intelligence in a way that in areas where I may be lacking, and therefore look at how others may perceive me. And so therefore I fix that part of how I come across, as opposed to worrying about the 1,000 people I work with and determining what all of their profiles are, DISC or Myers-Briggs or whatever it is. So that's how I look at it. And that's how I use it. Is what is it about me that makes sense? So
yeah, it's a tool of exploration that helps you with analysis. It's not a result in its own end.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm very comfortable with that statement. Go ahead.
No, when you're assessing a client's behavior or someone else's character or behavior, do you use any kind of trademarks other than these personality assessments? Like trademark, do you use any other metrics or tools?
I use a lot. I use the traditional tools in communication and in rhetoric, active listening.
Yeah.
I count basically how many questions to how many sentences people are saying. Are they curious or are they directive? Are they focused on one item, whether they realize it or they're always coming back to that? If they say a certain word like worried more than 3 times in 5 minutes, okay, there's a concern here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's these little things. Instead of tools, it's a series of habits of collecting data and turning it into information that I can use to drive my decisions. Again, things like using when they talk about me and I, instead of talking about you or them. I really am fascinated by people who talk about them. they're basically zero sum players, or they're in a zero sum conquest that either they're going to win or they're going to lose. And so this gives me a really good understanding of how to, number one, understand the world they're in, understand the decisions they're trying to make, number two, and number three, understand what advice they'd be willing to accept to get them what they truly need.
Yeah. Someone asked me that question one time in terms of what assessment tools I use. And, Myers-Briggs and all. And I said, well, I use my gut, and that's not trademark. So I feel like, and here's the thing, that when I say I use my gut that has been developed over the years, because my gut today is way different than the one that advised me 20 years ago. And it's because I spent time, I think I've shared this with you before, Tim, that I'm a people watcher. And I've spent time observing. When I walk into a meeting, I'm not the first one to talk. I'm the one that observes how everyone else is speaking or talking, much like you were just saying, the kinds of verbiage that comes out of their mouth, the way they interact, the way their body language is shown. And so a lot of times in a meeting, I can go 30 minutes without saying a word, but I have observed every single person's behavior in that process. And as a result of that, I think my gut has got better and better and better in terms of being able to assess not only the other person's emotional intelligence, but how I need to interact with that person to be most effective.
Yes, yes. You've turned your formal analysis into a series of habits that are almost muscle memory. I've taught over 10,000 people, and I know what the struggles are in learning our section of knowledge, both in business and in education. And I know what the struggles are. And when I hear certain comments or certain directives, I know what they need to learn. And so, like you, it's like my gut kicks in. But I have chat logs back to 2004 on my classes. You don't have to have a face-to-face conversation. It makes it a lot easier. But, you'd be surprised at what you can pick up if you allow people a little bit of interchange or conversation in your meetings. This is why I like to be collaborative. Not because I want to be friendly. It's because that's how I gather my information.
Well, and it's almost like, the part of your brain that's on autopilot versus the part of your brain that's intentional. And so when it comes to, like, let's say brushing your teeth, when you were 4 years old, it was intentional. When you're 40 years old, it's autopilot. In fact, sometimes you can go through your day and wonder if you even brushed your teeth because it's so automatic. And I think that's the same way with this, is when you're first learning how to apply your emotional intelligence, how to read other people's emotional intelligence, I think it's very intentional, very, you almost go home at night and journal your experience so that you can kind of compare, like, how did I react in this situation? How did that person react? And after you do this for a while, and after the years go by, it becomes much more of an automated response where you can pick something up very, very quickly.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me, why are you so patient? It's because I wasn't patient and I wanted to learn how. And so every time I got upset or heated in a conversation with my students, I'd take a note of that. I'd say, okay, what was the topic? How did they present themselves? How did I present myself? And what could I change?
Yeah.
And it was a slow process over about 3 to 5 years where I reduced the opportunity for people to push my triggers. And this is the concept of emotional intelligence, understanding your internal landscape. It's learning how you are an emotional mechanism.
Well, and here's a great example. I'm working on a project. Let's say I'm a project manager, right? I'm working on a project. Things are going very, very well. And people react to me very, very, my team just loves me, right? The things are going, they interact with me. Why it's fun. We have our parties, our team parties, we have and things are going very well. And so people like me. Now, same project, suddenly there's a deadline looming and we're behind. Now, how is my team reacting to me is dependent on how I am reacting to me. What's my stress level as a result of that project deadline? And how is it that how is it that I'm dealing with people who come to me as when I'm in the middle of this stressful situation? And I think if we observe our behavior and therefore how people react to us in our behavior in different situations, we learn much more and much more quickly.
Oh yeah. I chuckle to myself in classes, and it confuses people. And sometimes people take it as as I'm putting them down, like patting them on the head and saying, "You're so cute." And I stopped myself from doing that for a while, about 6 or 7 years ago. But then I started introducing it to them by actually using this example as a classroom exercise in exploring emotional intelligence, sort of like letting them in on the joke.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing that actually is what we call a teachable moment. Finding where people are truly curious, where it can add value to the project as well as to the human experience.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. The other thing I've learned to do over the years is develop a sense of humor and not just have a sense of humor, but know when to apply it.
Yes.
You know, when you're in a meeting and your chief stakeholder is exhibiting some sort of anger, that is not the time to crack a joke. But there are times when you can use a sense of humor to relieve some tension, to just let people off the hook or something. So, yeah, that's also part of exhibiting or developing your emotional intelligence is to develop that sense of humor.
Yeah, and looking for the sense of humor and looking for curiosity. It's funny because people will step out of their workday rules. They'll step out of their rank and authority if you find that they're curious about something. Like that's why we have icebreakers when we have our project kickoff. So we can learn something personal about each other. And it gives us an opportunity to create these professional relationships slowly. And again, we think about icebreakers and trust circles as silly, but used effectively, they can actually, proactively establish an opportunity for us to grow in our relationships quite quickly.
Oh, very much so. And I love that whole idea of seeing how curious they are. I also watch for those who have the attitude of, but that's not how we do it here.
Yes.
That's not the way we've always done it. Well,
Right.
and so and again, you have to walk with perhaps kid gloves around those people and slowly get them to change their minds towards, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea.
And that's, I put a lot of emphasis behind that as well. A lot of our projects are critical to business, which means it's going to upset culture. And we have to respect the fact that these people use culture to define their group. And so we have to give them the time and the support to be able to say, okay, I have to put this expectation of our group to bed, and we have to think of bigger things. It's the executives who understand this and take advantage of this in these 2 to 3 year projects. I think they're almost wizards in helping their organization and structuring and ordering their organizational activities in such a way they can easily help their company pivot quickly.
Well, exactly. And those are the executives who have worked on themselves. They have learned to develop their emotional intelligence. They have learned to, I mentioned journaling, and I know you journal, I journal. There's ways of putting things down in writing that you can reflect upon later that help you to kind of introspectively learn how to grow. And I think the people who don't work on themselves outside of just what we call the arts and the charts, I think those people don't ever rise to the level that they could have. Had
Well,
they,
and the entertainment factor is limited. You
yeah.
know, being able to juggle is one thing. You know, it's a skill, but the thing is, there's a limit to that. But being able to entertain people and understanding how to present juggling as entertainment,
Yeah.
there's an unlimited amount of value there. We're talking about the same thing.
Boy, you just reminded me, I'm going to go off on a short tangent. You ever watch the TV show America's Got Talent?
Oh yeah.
And once in a while, you'll see the magician who's fine, just a fine, fine magician, but it's the personality that they bring to their magic that really enhances the entertainment value. I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's the ability to engage.
Yeah.
And whether you're a janitor or a lunchroom attendant, or whether you're in an oak-lined C-suite office, leadership is leadership. And you can tell the people who've truly worked on themselves.
You know, just speaking of that, whenever I've had the privilege of having an office, and typically as a consultant, your client doesn't give you an office, but whenever I've had the privilege of having an office, my door was open out of the 40-hour work week, 39 and 3/4 hours, because you just have to be available. You have to be showing yourself, even with an open door, is a signal to those people around you that you are available and that you are ready to talk to them or interact with them in some way that they can't be afraid to approach you.
Very good. Very good.
Have
Yeah.
we exhausted this topic?
I think we have landed this airplane very well.
Yeah. That's right.
I appreciate this. This is a good topper. I spend a lot of time with the concept of emotional intelligence and earning emotional intelligence in my classroom. And I really appreciate the time and the interest you have in this as well.
Well, and there's times when I spout off I was going to say wisdom, but probably my learned approach to things. I wish I had had this when I was 25. It's
Yeah.
starting off in leadership. It just,
And the problem is, because of the way humans develop, we really don't have the tools and the interest till we get into our 30s and 40s
yeah.
when we've actually exhausted our ability to refine our skills. I don't know. I think it's just a natural tendency.
I think so too, but I said that kind of for the benefit of our audience, especially for those who are coming into leadership, is if you begin to develop that interest now, pick up one or two little nuggets from what we've talked about today and begin to apply those even as a 25 or 30-year-old. I think you can be far ahead of the game by the time you reach our experience level. So,
And and if nothing else, just as a tool for self-exploration.
yeah,
Professional development, personal development, that repays itself hundreds and hundreds of times over as you mature.
it does. Yep. Well, good. This was fun.
Yes, it was. Yes, it
It's
was.
great.
So where can we find you when you and I are not in the show?
Not in the show. Just look me up on LinkedIn. Oh, I'm on many platforms, but LinkedIn is the one that's my IT, my project management, my leadership platform. So find me there, Merv Jersak or People First Project Manager.
And myself as well. I'm starting to clear out my messages. I'm inviting people. If you want to connect with me, great. I do this for my students, but as a service to all project managers. It's fun to help people, and it's also a learning for me as well.
And the thing about LinkedIn is there's such a plethora of diamonds of knowledge out there. I think at some point, maybe when you and I come across a particularly excellent article, maybe we should bring it to the show and just kind of talk about it. So there's LinkedIn is such a beautiful tool.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And again, thanks for the time for the show, and I'm looking forward to moving into the next chapter of our material. We'll be starting next week, everyone, and we're going to be starting to look at more of the practical or technical components of project management. I can't
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah. And you're going to be hard pressed, Tim, to keep me from, even as we talk about that, from bringing in the people aspect.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Merv.
Yeah. Well, great. I appreciate this, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks again, and thanks everyone.